That's the question we're asking this morning as the US and Iran remain locked in an escalating conflict that has routed the Middle East for weeks. There's been an extraordinary public split which has emerged. This over whether diplomacy is actually happening. On one hand, you have US President Donald Trump saying Washington has held, and I quote, very good and productive conversations with Iran officials and even paused strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. This is obviously suggesting that a possible off ramp from full blown war. But officials in Tehran have seemingly denied all such negotiations took place, calling the claims fake news and insisting that there have been no talks with the United States of America at all. The result, well, a dangerous fog of uncertainty about whether diplomacy is advancing or whether each side is engaging in tactical messaging amid rising violence and regional instability. To help us unpack this high stakes disagreement and what it means for peace, conflict, and just the global security, we are joined by Dr. Ali Alsayegh, Middle East politics scholar and analyst. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
And I think we'll jump right into it. What do you make of the current state of affairs where we find ourselves? And what do you make, or if you can, maybe for our listeners, clarify what exactly President Donald Trump was referring to when he said there had been productive conversations with Iran officials, obviously saying no such thing happened.
So, first of all, Donald Trump is someone who's a chronic over-exaggerator. He tends to like to make things bigger than what they currently are. From what we know and what is confirmed on both sides is that there are indirect messages that are taking place between the United States and Iran through the intermediaries of Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey. So it is not at the stage of talks. It is not a negotiation. It is certainly not at a stage that is good. If we can just look at the landscape at the moment, we can understand that for them to find an agreement with each other is actually a little bit far-fetched at the moment, especially with the strikes still ongoing. Donald Trump saying that it was only 2 days away from attacking Iranian power plants and then postponing it because of talks, I think is fallacious. Trying to say that this was a postponement because of good talks, it actually hides the fact that Donald Trump did not actually have a real plan to target Iranian power plants. If anyone knows anything about Iranian power plants in Iran, they are actually decentralized. Some of them cannot be even targeted because they're in mountains. So what I think Trump is doing is that he's creating a narrative that can be used for a dual purpose. On the one hand, he's waiting to see where these indirect messages are going to go, and he's going to try to use this sort of narrative to say that there is actually something that is happening that could be resolved, that could resolve this ongoing escalation. On the other hand, he can always at any moment, if things don't go the way he plans, say that Iran were not negotiating properly, they were not really, they didn't mean business as the way that he would put it. And we have to also keep in mind that he is also very aware that these indirect messages could possibly, there's a huge likelihood of it not turning into constructive talks, because he always says, I hope, but I can't guarantee. So he does know that this could not lead to somewhere positive. And honestly, with the way that things are right now, the war is ongoing. There are still strikes. Israel is still targeting Iran. The US is still targeting Iran. Iran is still targeting Israel, targeting Gulf states with their recent aggressions that even happened less than 12 hours ago. So there is a lot of possibility that this couldn't work out. Something might happen in terms of these attacks that could escalate the matter and essentially mean that the indirect talks don't even bring out any real solution to what's happening at the moment. And there's so much more to say, of
Mm,
course.
no, most definitely. In practical terms, what counts as a negotiation is in a situation like this? Would it be direct country to country talks or indirect talks or mediated by third parties, as you mentioned, the likes of Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan being involved in back channel communication? How would it work?
So essentially, what would be considered a talk is if US and Iranian officials come together on a negotiating table with a mediator. At the moment, we've seen some reports of Iran saying if you want talks, then it has to be in person, direct. But the thing is, when it comes to Iran at the moment, is that they are chronically aware that negotiations doesn't necessarily mean that the United States has pure intentions. We saw this in the recent negotiations that went haywire. They were close to a
Mm,
deal. Great, all of the kind of senior analysts, even the Armani foreign minister, said that they were really close to an amazing deal. Iran was willing to give up on its nuclear stockpile, and in the middle of that deal, Donald Trump, I think, was tricked by Israel as well as his own negotiators, which have, I think, in my assessment, more loyalty to Zionism than U.S. national interest. They told him, "See, look, Iran were willing to give up on their nuclear stockpile. We can get more out of them. We just need to hit them hard." And then after that happened, Trump got stuck in an escalation ladder that is now a kind of world in its own. Now, I think it's not logical to think that Donald Trump can at any moment say that he doesn't want to have anything to do with this war and just leave, because it's not about Donald Trump anymore. It's about the US empire and whether or not it's declining. Them, if Iran get out of this war with a win, and when I mean what I mean by a win is that the US is not able to achieve any of its goals. Iran has control over the Strait of Hormuz. They get out of it with permanent sanctions relief or even reparations. That is a loss for the United States empire. It targets the very illusion that the US is somehow the superior hegemon, global hegemon of the world. And so at the moment, I don't think Donald Trump has many off ramps,
mm,
uh,
mm,
and it's difficult to really have any sort of hope in these talks. But of course, there are some scenarios that we do need to bear in mind. But within these scenarios, I also have a lot of doubts because these scenarios that could work out, Israel has doesn't have much interest in them because it would mean that Israel would lose and Iran would win. What I mean by those scenarios is that somehow these indirect messages turn into talks. Iran is not going to accept any deal that doesn't give them security guarantees and is not a major economic win. And a
mm,
major economic win would look like permanent sanctions relief or control over the Strait of Hormuz, maybe putting fees on every ship that passes by, which is huge, especially when 40% of the world's energy passes through that strait. Or if we're talking about reparations as well, it's hard to believe that Israel would accept such a deal that would end up empowering Iran rather than degrading its power. And it's difficult not to see that Israel would try to hijack and ruin that process when it gets the chance to do so.
Most definitely, and I think you're touching on something that's very very important and something that a lot of people worldwide have been grappling with. What would a win for the United States of America look like? You mentioned what would a win for Iran looks like, which is essentially defending their homeland, making sure that they come out of this unscathed without any change when it comes to regime change, if I can put it that way. For Israel, also they have their own ambitions, especially being in the region. For the United States of America, 4 or 5 weeks into this war, we're still not quite clear what exactly is the strategy from Donald Trump and what would consider a win if all is said and done.
I think when it comes to Donald Trump and what he'd see as a win is, obviously the complete dismantlement of the Iranian regime, the control over the Strait of Hormuz. And what I mean by the dismantlement of the Iranian regime, I think it's unrealistic to think that the Iranian regime is somehow going to dissolve. I mean, look at Gaza. Israel for 2 years has tried to do regime change alongside the genocide, of course, and Hamas is still there.
Mm.
And Hamas cannot be compared in terms of, organizational capacity, power, capabilities to the IRGC. So it's absolutely fallacious to think that this regime is somehow going to disappear. But what I think his goal is to carve up Iran into different spheres of influence, create enough discord and chaos wherein there is no such thing as a monopoly over the means of violence within the territory of Iran. This would be a win for Trump.
Mm.
Israel, on the other hand, of course, this would be a win for them, but they want to see a protracted conflict. They don't want this to end quickly, in my opinion. Although with the recent damage that's been happening on Israel, they might be pressured from their society to put an end to this quicker. At the moment, it's a bit difficult to read exactly what's happening inside Israel in terms of public opinion, in terms of damage as well, because of all of this kind of disinformation, misinformation that's coming out of there, so much blocking as well of videos of the damage that's happening. But what we do know is that the damage is becoming increasingly more difficult to deal with. Maybe there is a scenario where Israel says, okay, we'll try to accept some sort of deal that is an off-ramp, and we'll recollect ourselves and start this war at another time. But Iran is very acutely aware of this, because that's what happened the last time around. They agreed to a ceasefire. Israel and the United States recollected themselves, and they attacked Iran again. So that is essentially what we can read at the moment when it comes to the situation between all of the different sides and what they may see as a win
Mm. Mm.
and a
Lastly,
loss.
lastly, before I let you go, Doc, this was entering its fourth week. Donald Trump had projected it to be ending, in three weeks, but it looks very, very fluid. What do you see going forward now? What can people expect? And also the Gulf countries themselves, have you seen their reaction change when it comes to how they've been responding to this war, being in Doha yourself?
I think when it comes to where this war is going, based off of what we know so far, it seems like it will only escalate further, and unless by some miracle these indirect messages turn into talks and there's some
Mm.
sort of an agreement that is made between the US, Iran, and Israel. And Israel will not like the agreement, but they, I think, will assess that maybe they would have to accept it because of the amount of pressure that they're dealing with. Although, again, I do think that this is still unlikely, though I would not write it off completely. in terms, and also there is an escalation ladder that's happening. And when
Mm.
it comes to war, it is very volatile. There are so many different developments that happened at different moments in time that we didn't expect. And it caused the escalation ladder to go further up rather than further down. And when it comes to the Gulf states, I think they've really they have legitimate grievances against Iranian aggression, and we have to bear this in mind. This is something that's really important, which
Mm.
is that Iran, the way that they're approaching this war is that they know that they can't get a military victory against the United States. But what they try to do is increase the cost onto all of the other countries in the region, particularly the Gulf states, because Gulf states and the oil that they produce is the basis of the petrodollar.
Mm.
And when they attack those oil facilities, when they also close the Strait of Hormuz, this means that there's less oil coming out of this region. Also, simultaneously, that means that the dollar is going to gradually lose its value. At the moment, what we also see is that they're attacking civilian infrastructure, and this is their way of kind of pressuring the Gulf states to pressure the United States to stop this war. This it's obviously not defensible to target civilian infrastructure or conduct any of these illegal attacks that put civilian life under harm's way. But this is the way that they're thinking about it. They're thinking that we should pressure Iran should pressure the world economically, and in a way that this has worked. So when it comes to the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump, on the one hand, didn't want to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which shows something, and this ties into what we're going to say about the Gulf and the way that they see things. It shows that he didn't really care about Gulf interest.
Mhm.
When the Strait of Hormuz was closed, the primary beneficiaries of this closure were US oil companies, US oil lobbyists. And Trump was absolutely happy with this. He said, we're making money. And this goes contrary to all of his promises of making sure that he protects Gulf interests and security. And Gulf citizens, I think, are waking up to that constantly. We see people who analysts, people who do commentary, as well as others who speak about politics publicly. They're realizing this. They're talking about this. They're criticizing the United States. We are becoming a lot more aware as a society that the United States never had our interest at heart, and they would discard our interest as soon as their interest came into play. But what Donald Trump didn't, I think, calculate properly is that at some point he has to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which he doesn't have the capability to do so because Iran can always target ships through mines and through very cheap drones that are also really hard to target. So he started to try to bully European or NATO states into helping him open up the strait. He tried to do a lot of different forms of threats, but he couldn't really open up the strait. And the reason why he needs to eventually open up the strait is because if the strait remains closed, it will lead to world economic collapse. And
Mm.
if world economic collapse happens, then the world will not be able to consume US goods. And this will inevitably mean that the US economy will also be destroyed. So in his mind, he thought that short term, the strait will help the United States. And then he had some sort of whimsical idea about how he's going to reopen the strait easily. And that's not really working out. And now, with him constantly, postponing his attacks on Iranian power plants, claiming that there are good talks, this is a way of him buying himself time. This is a way of him reducing the amount of anxiety that's in the world economic market at the moment. And if I return back to the question of the Gulf, I think the Gulf is acutely aware of everything that's happening at the moment. I don't think that they are happy with it, and there are increased calls for a greater Gulf cooperation in the future between them, in order to for us to have our own independent way to secure our security, stability, and interests without having to focus or depend on the United States.
There you go. I think we're going to leave on that note. Middle East politics scholar and analyst, Dr. Ali Alsayegh, coming to us from Doha. Really, really appreciate you giving us the time, and I hope we chat again soon. Salam.
Salam. Thank you.
And with that, we're going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.